And it's given by Julien Saban, and he's going to talk on electron-positron pair creation in nonlinear Dirac models.
Okay, thank you. So first I would like to thank the organizers for the invitation to this great workshop, and it's a pleasure to be here, and it's a great place to work at the Institute, so thank you. Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the phenomenon of electron-positron pair creation in a nonlinear Dirac model, which is an approximation of quantum electrodynamics. So first I want to recall some facts about the electron-positron pair creation. What is it? And explain what is it physically, and some mathematical result that we know about. And then I will present new result about this phenomenon. So the story begins, as many talks this week, with the Dirac operator. So which describes the kinetic energy of a relativistic electron. So here I have written it in units where the reduced Planck constant, the speed of light, and the mass of an electron are all one. And here I'm in 3 dimensions, so there is no graphene here, so I'm only in 3 dimensions. And I will denote the space of L2 functions with 4 components by H. Okay, so I will keep this notation throughout the talk. So one of the main features of the Dirac operator is that it is unbounded from below, and its spectrum goes from minus infinity to minus 1 and to plus 1 to plus infinity. So from a physical point of view, this negative part of the spectrum, it raises a serious issue, since no electron of negative kinetic energy has ever been observed, right? So to solve this problem, Dirac proposed to say that, well, all the negative kinetic energy states were already occupied in nature by virtual electrons that we couldn't observe, and hence, by the Pauli principle, a real electron couldn't have a negative kinetic energy, could only have a positive kinetic energy, since they are fermions. So for Dirac, the vacuum is not really void. It is filled with an infinite number of virtual particles, and if you want, mathematically it can be formally described by an infinite Slater determinant whose orbitals are given by any orthonormal basis of the negative spectral space of the Dirac operator, which I denote by H minus, and where P0 minus is the negative spectral projection of the Dirac operator. Right. So for Dirac, the vacuum is filled with an infinite number of charged particles. So it is good because it solves the problem of negative kinetic energy electrons, but it also must have some physical consequences, right? So, for instance, the distribution of charge of this Dirac sea of virtual electrons is uniform. When you don't put anything in the vacuum, it's uniform, so you can't measure it. But if you introduce an electric field in the vacuum, then maybe you can break this uniformity, and these charges will see this electric field, and then rearrange so that to fit the electric field, right? And so this breaking of the uniformity of the virtual electrons can be measured, and it's called vacuum polarization. So here the vacuum really acts as a polarizable medium, and when you put a defect into this medium, then it reacts and it rearranges itself. Another effect is the effect I want to talk about, is the effect of electron-positron pair creation. And it relies just on the fact that to say that if in the vacuum I have a virtual electron with negative kinetic energy, well, I can imagine that I give him enough energy, right? If I give it enough energy, then it will acquire a positive kinetic energy. And if it has a positive kinetic energy, then I can measure it. Okay? So it becomes a real particle with positive kinetic energy. But then, since it has left the Dirac sea, it has left a hole with respect to the complete Dirac sea. And this hole, with respect to the full Dirac sea, it also have a positive energy. So this hole can also be interpreted as a particle, as a real particle, and it is interpreted as a positron, which is the opposite particle of the positron, which has the same mass and same energy, but the opposite charge. So actually, when you take a virtual electron off the Dirac sea, you create 2 particles one real electron with positive kinetic energy and one real positron. And if this energy is brought by an external classical electric field, and if this field is strong enough, then it is expected that some pairs are created in this way. And this effect is called the Schwinger effect. It is just the effect of pair creation under a really strong electric field. So you see the Schwinger effect, this is what I want to study. It both involves vacuum polarization and electron-positron pair creation. Because I put an electric field in the vacuum, really strong, so the vacuum should polarize and also create pairs. So that was for the physical picture of electron-positron pair creation. And now I want to introduce the mathematical object necessary to describe it. So, for instance, what is the vacuum polarized by an external field? So, as any, it is a quantum system. So, when I have a quantum system, there should be a Hilbert space to describe it. And what is my quantum system? Well, my quantum system is a vacuum with an external field, and this vacuum can create a number of pairs, but I can create several pairs. I can create any number of pairs if the field is strong enough. So my Hilbert space should describe a quantum system with any number of electrons and positrons. So what is the mathematical way to do that? Well, it was already mentioned in the previous talks, but I detail it here. So if I want to describe one electron, then the one particle space for one electron can be identified with H+. H+ is the positive spectral subspace of the Dirac operator. So it is the one body space to describe an electron. And if I want to describe m electron, I just have to take the antisymmetric product m times of this one body space. And now if I want to describe a system with any number of electrons, then I have to sum over all the possible m. I have to sum this Hilbert space for all possible m. And then I get a Hilbert space describing a system of any number of electrons. For positrons, you do the same, but then the one particle space can be identified with H-, so the negative spectral subspace of the Dirac operator. And if you do the same and you tensorize the two Hilbert space, you get a Hilbert space describing any number of electrons and positrons. Okay? And this Hilbert space is denoted by F, and it's called the Fock space. So it was already introduced in previous talks, but anyway. And in this Fock space, there is a special state, which is the state with 0 electron and 0 positron. And this state is just the vacuum with nothing, so with nothing added to it, so we call it the free vacuum, the state with just no electron and no positron. So now we want to add an external electric field to this electric potential to this vacuum. So the question is, what vector in this Hilbert space can describe the vacuum polarized by my external potential V? So in order to define it, I know we'll assume, so it is very formal at this level, that there is some Hamiltonian on my Fock space, which describe a system of any number of electron and positron interacting with V, but also that can interact with each other. Okay, so this kind of Hamiltonian may be given physically by QED, for instance. So then, with this setting, there is basically two possibilities to study to define the vacuum polarized by V. So the first one is to say, well, what is the vacuum polarized by V? It is just the best energy configuration of my system. So I just take the ground state of H of V, and this is a state in the Fock space, which I denote by omega of V, and well, it describes my polarized vacuum. So the other possibility is to consider the evolution of the free vacuum by this Hamiltonian H of V. So I just start at time t equals 0 by my free vacuum, omega, and then I let it polarize dynamically by my external potential V. And then I can look at time goes to infinity, what results. And here, of course, if I take the time-dependent setting, V can be time-dependent. So that can be useful in some physical situations. So both approaches are okay. And now, if you want to define what is the probability that the external field V creates a pair in this vacuum, well, it is simple. I just have to define this probability P of V. Well, in the first case, in the ground state case, I defined this probability to be 1 minus the modulus square of the inner product in the Fock space between the free vacuum and the polarized one. So why do I do that? So first of all, it is a number between 0 and 1. Okay, all the states are normalized, so this inner product is lower than 1. And if this probability is 0, then that means that this inner product is 1. So that means exactly that the polarized vacuum is the free vacuum. So I have not created any pairs. And if it is 0, then that means that the polarized vacuum omega of V, when in the Fock space, it lives in the spaces with at least 1 electron or 1 positron, because it is the scalar product with the free vacuum is 0 then. So this number describes the probability that the vacuum polarized by V creates a pair. Okay, and in the time-dependent case, you just take the same definition, but with the limit, the time goes to infinity. So in the first case, we talk about static pair creation because there is no time. In the second case, we talk about dynamical pair creation. Okay, so this seems like a good definition to study pair creation, but the only problem is that this Hamiltonian H of V is not mathematically well defined. I mean, both these objects are actually really strongly ill-defined. For instance, this Hamiltonian is never bounded below, so the notion of ground state is never clear, and it's not even clear how to define it as a self-adjoint operator. So this is very formal. I mean, mathematically, we cannot do it in full generality for now. But there is actually one case where we can define both these objects with no ambiguity. So this case is what I call the linear case. It is the case where the interaction between the particles are neglected. So why everything is well defined in this case? Because when you neglect the interactions, it is easy to define the ground state, because the ground state corresponds to filling all the negative energy states of the operator, the one-body operator d0 plus v. So the particles don't see each other. So in order to reach the lowest energy, I just fill the negative energy state. So of course, this state has also an infinite energy, but at least I know that it is the ground state. Right? So under some suitable assumption on V, you can associate to this. It corresponds really to a state in the Fock space, right? And there is a theorem by Klaus and Scharf in '77. Who estimate the probability that V creates a pair when the omega of V is defined in this way. And they show that this probability is 1 if and only if there is an eigenvalue of the operator d0 plus tv that crosses 0 when the parameter t here increases from 0 to 1. So that just means that when you turn on the potential, you look at the eigenvalue of this operator. So of course everything has to be really smooth so that you can follow the eigenvalues. But if one of them crosses 0, then there is a particle that is created. Okay. So that's what they showed. And here something happens. So there is a simple criterion in terms of one body operator d0 plus v, and you really have to look at 0 at what happened at 0, because here the 0 here corresponds to the 0 here. But what is important is that you have to look at all the history of this operator. I mean, you cannot just look at this operator and tell if there are pairs that are created. You really have to look at the spectrum of all this family of operators. So that's why it's not so. This criterion is not so obvious. Okay, so that was for the ground state approach, and for the dynamical approach, so the time-dependent approach. When we neglect the interactions, it is also easier. Why? Because I said that we started with the free vacuum, and I also said that the free vacuum can be, at least formally, described by an infinite Slater determinant. And when my Hamiltonian has no interaction between the particles, when it preserves the structure of the Slater determinants, meaning that in the time evolution, for all time, my state remains a Slater determinant, if I start with a Slater determinant. So I just have to study the time evolution in the one-body space of these orbitals when I start with the state in the negative spectral space. And this setting was studied by Pickel and Dürr in 2008, and they came up with this theorem. So if you if you consider a potential that depends on time, but with the time and space variable being separated, so you have a switching factor in time. So this mu of t is compactly supported, so that means that the potential, the fixed potential V, that you turn it on and then you turn it off again in time. Okay, and the assumption here on V is that the eigenvalue 1 is in the spectrum of D0 plus V with finite multiplicity. So you notice the difference here between the first theorem. Something here happened at 0, and here something happens at 1. Okay, and if you start with a state which is exactly in this eigen space with the eigenvalue 1, then they show that in the adiabatic limit that well, asymptotically in the past, then this state belongs to the negative spectral subspace, and asymptotically in the future, this state belongs to the positive spectral subspace. Right? So you have a transition, you have a family of states that goes from the negative spectral space to the positive spectral space. So if you go back formally to the Fock space, it just tells you that you are orthogonal to the free vacuum, and then you have your theorem. Right? Okay, so that was for the case with no interactions, and of course you cannot do that if you consider interactions, because what I've said is not true. You don't know the ground state exactly, and it does not remain a Slater determinant. So here in my talk, I want to study the case with interactions. So I will study the case with interactions and in the time-independent setting. So I will just consider the ground state problem and with interactions. So we cannot deal with the full Hamiltonian, of course, of QED. So we'll have to make an approximation, and the usual approximation we make to study interacting system is to do a mean field approximation. So that was the mean field approximation that Mathieu and Eric and other people talked about during this week. So we do this mean field approximation to again reduce to a problem posed in the one body space, but now it is an interacting problem. And I will present two results. The first one is an estimate of the probability that the vacuum that I have built this way, the interacting vacuum, creates pairs when I put a really strong field in the vacuum. So Z denotes here the strength of the electric field that I will put in the vacuum, and I will study its probability asymptotically in Z. And in a second result, I will try to compare the interacting case that I will build here with the non-interacting result of Klaus and Scharf. So I have a result in the interacting case and a result in the non-interacting case, and I want to compare pair creation between these two cases and how the interaction acts. I mean, does it what is the behavior with respect to the pair creation of the interactions? So I will introduce a coupling constant. We will control the interactions, and I will let this coupling constant goes to 0 and see what happens. Okay. So before presenting these results, I will introduce what is this mean field approximation of QED. So the strategy here is simple. Actually, Eric and Mathieu and even Christian already talked about it. It is just to assume that the polarized vacuum in the Fock space satisfies a property that it is quasi-free. And why do I suppose that? Well, maybe you all know that, but these quasi-free states have the property that they are uniquely described by an operators on the one-body space, and here there will be orthogonal projection because I take vectors in the Fock space, so their density matrices are orthogonal projections, and so I can the variable of my system is no longer a vector in the complicated Fock space, but it is now an operator on the one-body space. So you see, you pass to the Fock space from the one-body space, but the price to pay is that while you had a vector in the Fock space, you now have an operator in the one-body space. So this one-to-one correspondence between quasi-free states in the Fock space and operators on the one-body space. For instance, it is given by this correspondence. If you start from a Slater determinant, then the one-body density matrix is just the orthogonal projection of the space spanned by the orbitals of the Slater determinant. So this is really like the Hartree-Fock usual theory, and that's why this theory is sometimes called the generalized Hartree-Fock theory. So from now on, the strategy is quite clear. I will start from the free vacuum in the Fock space. So it's one body density matrix by this formula, since I said that it was like an infinite Slater determinant, is well defined, and it is just the spectral projection, negative spectral projection of the Dirac operator. And it is a bounded operator on H. And now, so I can again reduce the energy given by QED to this quasi-free state, and it's just an energy only depending on the one body density matrices. So it's still not bounded below, and it's still not quite easily defined. But then we can, there is some procedure that makes it bounded below, and that makes a we can do a minimization procedure to build the polarized vacuum at the level of density matrices. So that is the advantage of passing to the density matrices, that we can build rigorously a polarized vacuum in this setting. And when we have built the density matrix associated to the polarized vacuum, we can go back in the Fock space by the one-to-one correspondence between quasi-free states and the density matrices to build the corresponding state, and then I can compute the inner product that I'm interested in. Okay, so this Hartree-Fock approximation of QED, it was first introduced by Shea, Hirakan, and Lyons in 1989, and the first rigorous results about it were given by Barbaroux, Helfer, and Zidentop in 1999. And then another model was introduced by Gravja, Heinzel, Levin, Serre, and Solovej in a series of papers from 2005 to now, basically. So have you seen with Mathieu and Eric? And this model allows to describe the effect of vacuum polarization, and these effects these are precisely the effects that I'm interested in. So now, this model precisely describes this procedure here. So how do I make a minimization to find a candidate to be the density matrix of the polarized vacuum by V? So now I will describe this procedure. So as I said, the variable of my system is a one-body density matrix P. So I said that it was an orthogonal projection. Well, here I will relax this condition by just saying that it is a self-adjoint operator on the one-body space H between 0 and 1. And the variable of my energy will not be P, actually, it will be P minus P0 minus. P0 minus, I recall you that it is the negative spectral projection of the Dirac operator. And in this representation, the free vacuum is represented by Q equals 0. So, okay, so the variable is not P, it is P minus P0 minus, and I will denote it by Q. I will also assume that my external potential is generated by a density of charge Z nu, is the Coulomb potential generated by Z nu. So why I take Z nu? I want to study strong fields. So I just put a parameter Z in front of the density of charge, and I want to study a strong field, I just take Z to be very big. And nu can then be interpreted as maybe the shape of a nucleus that you put in the vacuum and that you want to study. And now, in this model, which is called the Bogoliubov Dirac-Fock approximation, the energy of any quantum state described by a density matrix Q is given by this formula, which has 4 terms. So the first term is the trace of D0 times Q. So it is the kinetic energy of my quantum system. So here it is not really a trace, because this will not be trace class, so it's something more general than a trace, but I won't detail it, it is not really important in my talk. And then there is the interaction between the density of charge associated to my state Q, which is defined in this fashion, and the external density of charge Z nu. So this is the Coulomb interaction between these two density of charge, and I have a coupling constant here, alpha, in front of this interaction. Then I have the electrostatic energy of my density of charge associated to my quantum state Q, and also it is quadratic in Q, and I also have a coupling constant in front of it, and then I have a last term, x of Q, which is either 0, and if it is 0, we talk about the reduced model. So I will put a little r in front of the BDF in the energy. So it is maybe simpler to study this model. Or if it is not 0, it is the usual exchange term in Hartree-Fock theory, which is a non-convex term given by this expression. So if I include the exchange term, I will talk about the full model. Right? So I will distinguish between these two models. So sometimes I will have one result which is posed for the reduced model, and the other which is given for the full model. So I won't talk about the derivation of this energy, so how you derive it from QED and how you make it, what are the manipulations to obtain this form. But anyway, it describes a quantum system, and it is this energy has the advantage of being bounded below. So it is really a good feature from compared to QED. But written in this form, it has no minimizer on any reasonable, variational set. So in order to find minimizer, we have to introduce a cutoff. So Mathieu and Eric already talked about it. A cutoff lambda, which is a positive number. So you already seen it, but what is the method to implement such a cutoff? Well, the method is to replace the one-bodied operator h by the operator h lambda, which is just composed of wave functions with whose Fourier transform as we supported in a ball of radius lambda. So the introduction of cutoff of such a cutoff is known to be necessary in physics, and now we see that mathematically it is also necessary, because when we don't have it, we cannot find a minimizer. So it is also a mathematical justification of an introduction of such a cutoff. And then if I replace the one-body space h by h lambda, then I can find a minimizer of the BDF energy, or even the reduced BDF energies, on a given variational set that I won't detail. But this minimizer is a good candidate to be the polarized vacuum polarized by my external potential V, generated by my external density of charge nu. So so both the RBDF energies and BDF energies have a minimizer, and in the full model case, the polarized vacuum, the minimizer is not unique, but actually there is one of them which satisfies the following mean field equation, and it is really easy to interpret it, because you see that the polarized vacuum is just the negative spectral projection of a modified Dirac operator. This modified Dirac operator is just the classical Dirac operator, but with a potential which is generated by the total density of charge of the system, which is the density of charge of the vacuum and the external density of charge. So that is really what you want physically. Just you have something which is self-consistent. So you see that it is non-linear, because this Dirac operator depends itself on the Q. And you see the full density of charge here. And since we work in h lambda, we also have to put the projection on h lambda on each side, because this operator here does not preserve the space h lambda. So you have to project again to have an operator which is well posed in h lambda. So anyway, this method, so this theorem was proved by Eisner, Levin, and Serre in 2005, and I will work with this polarized vacuum to study pair creation from now on. Okay. So my first result concerned the reduced model, so without the exchange term, and I will study a regime. Well, the simplest regime that you can think of is the regime when you fix the coupling constant and the cutoff function, and you just put a really strong field in the vacuum. That is, you study the limit z to infinity. Then if I call Pz the probability that the vacuum polarized by this external potential creates at least a pair, then we were able to prove that for z large enough, this probability Pz is bigger than 1 minus an exponential of minus a constant, depending on the parameters of the system, times z to the power 2/3. So what does it mean? First of all, it is reassuring, because it shows that it goes exponentially to 1 when z goes to infinity. So the stronger the field, the more likely you are to create a pair, so it is reassuring. And also what's interesting here is that we have a power z to the power 2/3. So this power 2/3, as we will see, is really due to the cutoff, and the fact that the polarized vacuum cannot really follow the external potential because of this cutoff. And if we do the calculation formally without the cutoff, it would be a z here instead of a z power 2/3. So the cutoff loses a power of z. Okay. So since the proof of this theorem is really simple, I will sketch it to you in just one slide. So if I call the omega z the state in the Fock space, which represents the polarized vacuum, so I put it in quotes here because sometimes it is not a state in the Fock space, it is a more general definition of state, but it is not important here. So if omega z is this state, then the probability that I have to estimate is just this quantity that I have defined, so I have to estimate this inner product. And the starting point is to say that, to exploit the fact that I have supposed that this omega z was quasi-free. So if this omega is quasi-free, we are able to prove a general family of inequalities for quasi-free states on the Fock space. And this is the type of inequality that this, for any quasi-free state omega prime in the Fock space, the component in the zero particle space is controlled by a quantity which is an average quantity, which is exponential minus a universal constant times the average particle number of omega prime. So you see here you have a pointwise quantity which is the value in the zero particle space, and here you have an average value which is the average number of particles of my state. So it is really specific to quasi-free state that I can control pointwise value by average value. So we were able to show this, and so in order to control this scalar product, I just have to control the average particle number of omega prime. So the advantage is that this average number of particles is exactly related to the for omega is more or less the trace. Is more or less the trace of my state Q. So it is not trace class, so it's not really a trace, but morally it is it. So it is we can control it in terms of the variable of my BDF functional. So it is better. So we go from the Fock space to the one body density matrices here. So to control this quantity, actually we show that we can control this average particle number by the energy, the ground state energy of the reduced Bogoliubov-Dirac-Fock model. So in order to control this quantity, I just have to control this quantity, and this we can exactly have the behavior in Z, the asymptotic behavior in Z of the ground state energy of the Bogoliubov-Dirac-Fock model, and it behaves like Z to the power 5/3. So it is quite surprising because when you look at the energy, you can think that it is Z squared, but actually we were able to show a lower bound, showing that the 5/3 is really optimal. So if you go back here, you lose the power of Z here, so that's why you get a Z to the power 2/3 here, and then you can go back here and you have the result, the Z to the power 2/3. So this method is really general in the sense that it really depends on. There are a lot of models that are described by effective one-body density matrices, and here we provide a method to go back to the Fock space. It is not the link between the vector in the Fock space and the one-body density matrix is really complicated, but here we provide a method to do this link, so maybe it can be useful in other models. So that was for the first result I want to present, and the second result is given in the full model. So here I will consider the exchange term, and I will study a regime where the complete constant will go to 0. So that's why I announced I wanted to compare the interacting and the non-interacting case. So I just try to put off the interactions, and I will also fix the complete constant times the strength of the external field. So if alpha goes to 0, you see that Z has to go to infinity. So we are again in the case of strong fields. So it is reassuring in the point of view of percuation. And last but not least, we also have to fix alpha times the log of lambda, where I remind you that the lambda is the cutoff of my model. So why do I take such a range of parameters? So remember the equation satisfied by the polarized vacuum. It is the negative spectral projection of a modified Dirac operator. And in this set of parameters, you see that the alpha z here is constant. So I can see my modified Dirac operator as d0 minus a constant times v nu, where v nu is just the Coulomb potential generated by nu, plus alpha times the nonlinear part, which is exactly the part describing the interactions. So we see that in this regime, alpha controls really the interaction and the non-linearity. Okay, and we also have to, if we want to compare this operator with the operator with no interaction, which is the operator d0 minus kappa v nu, we also have to take lambda to infinity because we have to get rid of this projection here. So what I say is just that the way to take lambda to infinity is not any way to be able to measure something. You have to fix alpha log lambda so that when alpha goes to 0, lambda goes to infinity, but in such a way that alpha log lambda stays bounded. So there is a technical result that I want to present first because I will need solutions to this equation, not only for 0 here, but if I put a chemical potential mu here. So it will be clear why I do that later. But anyway, this equation has solutions by the theorem of Heinzel, Levin, and Serre, but I don't know if it has solutions if I replace 0 by mu. So first I have to state a theorem that there exists solution to this equation when I introduce a chemical potential. So the result is the following. So if I assume that the one-body operator d0 minus v nu has a gap around the mu, with mu is any value in minus 1, 1, then I can solve this equation for alpha small enough, for lambda big enough, such that alpha log lambda stays bounded. Okay, so we see the divergences in the cutoff here that I have to control in order to solve this equation. So we can find a solution to that. And when you do a fixed, so how we prove this result? We just do a fixed point argument of the p. So you see that p is just a function of p. So I do a fixed point argument of this function to prove the existence of a solution to this equation. But what comes with the fixed point arguments, usually it comes with a priori estimates on the solution. So when you bootstrap this a priori estimates, actually you get a result of the limit when alpha goes to 0 to this projection in an adequate Banach space that I won't describe here. But you can show that the projection here converges to the projection with of a modified one-body operator. So it is not the operator d0 minus v nu, but rather d0 minus correction times v nu. And this correction is lower than 1, so it corresponds to a screening due to the polarized vacuum. Okay, so that shows that the limit alpha to 0 is singular. Yeah, right. Because when you formally take alpha to 0 here, this is not the operator that you find, and it corresponds to a charge renormalization of the system. So I won't insist on it because I don't have time. But here it's a kind of weak charge renormalization in the case with an exchange term. So it's not important, but anyway. The important is that I found a solution to this equation. So how do I apply this result to the context of pair creation? Well, I just look at the non-interacting operator, which is d0 minus v nu, and I just add a parameter kappa in front of my external potential. And then I assume that there are two parameters, two chemical potentials, mu minus and mu plus, such that I have a single eigenvalue of this operator between these two levels, and then the rest of the spectrum is just away from it, and it is uniformly away from it in terms of the parameter kappa. And now I want to move a little bit the parameter kappa so that this eigenvalue crosses 0. All right? So in the linear case, if we recall the result like Klaus and Scharf, when this eigenvalue crosses 0, that means that I have a particle in my non-interacting vacuum. So now I want to compare this pair creation if I turn on the interaction. So how do I turn on the interactions? Well, I just consider these two nonlinear solution, these two solutions of nonlinear problem that I just built by my preceding theorem. So I just take the projection up to mu plus and the projection up to mu minus. So physically, these two projections, so the projection up to mu plus represent the polarized vacuum, interacting polarized vacuum with the particle, and if I go up to mu minus, it represents the polarized interacting vacuum, but without a particle. And the question is, which one is better energetically? So which one the polarized vacuum wants to be? So is there a particle in the polarized vacuum or not, if you want? So to study which one is better energetically, well, you just introduce the difference between these two energies, right? It's natural, and you look when it is negative or positive. So when it is negative, the interacting vacuum has a particle, and when it is positive, the interacting vacuum has no particle in it. Right? And what we can prove is that in the limit alpha goes to 0 with the same parameter fixed, then this functional up to order big O of alpha goes to not to the eigenvalue of kappa nu. So it does not follow the behavior of the linear case, but rather to an eigenvalue associated to the external potential, which is renormalized, which is the same renormalization as here. So you see the renormalized potentially, so it's not surprising when you see the previous result, but it just says to you that when you turn on the interactions and the charge renormalization, well, the perturbation happens after it happens in the linear case, since you have to put a stronger kappa here to make this eigenvalue cross 0. Okay, so the perturbation really slows down the charge renormalization really slows down the perturbation. It is also an effect of interaction because without interaction we don't have such a cutoff. So. Okay, so that was all I wanted to say. And to conclude, so I have presented a model which describes electron perturbation with the interaction, and two results which are distinct: an estimation of the probability to create pairs when I go to really strong field, and a comparison with the linear case. And what remains to do, if one can look also at the next order in alpha of my function f of kappa here. Okay, so I've done an expansion up to big O of alpha, and one can ask for the next term in the expansion. We could better reflect the influence of interaction because here this first term you can always argue that it is purely an effect of renormalization of charge and not really of interactions. So if you want to see the effect of interaction, you may go at the next order right here. So we were able to compute this next order, but we are not able to see if it has any sign or because it is really complicated. So I won't talk about it. And another perspective, it is an estimation of the number of pairs that you create. So now we are able to prove that there are at least a pair in the vacuum. And now the question is, can you prove that there are at least k pairs in the vacuum? So you need estimates in the Fock space as I presented before. And finally, obviously, you need the more reasonable, at least physically, time-dependent setting when we study dynamical perturbation, as Pickle-Endure said, but with the interaction. So that's what remains to do. That's what remains to do also in the BDF case. So I will stop here. Thank you for your attention.
Question.
I just missed one thing. In your main result, do you assume that the model is reduced, or do you include the exchange term?
Which result? I have one result in the reduced model. So this model. Oh, sorry. This result is for the reduced model, and this the other result. So this one and this one are with the exchange term. So in this last result, for example, it is the full model, so with the exchange term.
A question.
With the vacuum polarization effect, you get a correction to the potential, to the Coulomb potential, which is the U-link potential.
Yeah.
Do you see the effect of this U-link potential, or is there any hope to see it maybe at next
maybe it is at next order. So it is not clear right now, so maybe it is hidden in this term right here. But right now we are not able to see it. I mean, this term is it is the next order, so maybe it is here, but we don't know yet. But yes, so everything is at next order for the U-link.
Any other question? So let's thank the speaker again and all the speakers.